notice what allegedly happened in TNT is being called digital colonialism. Trinidad and Tobago was described as the perfect test laboratory for what would become a global strategy for influencing elections. Well, why is that? To answer that question, we have consulting psychologist and managing director of Josal Consulting, Daryl Joseph, on set with us. Good evening, Mr. Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time really to join us. So I feel like a good place to start would be, what is digital colonialism?
Okay, good evening. Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago and the world. First of all, let's start with what colonialism is. Colonialism, as we should be familiar with in the West Indies, involves people coming into somewhere that they are not originally from and taking resources. Oftentimes taking those resources without any cooperation or willingness from those who were there before. So we'd be familiar with colonialism in terms of African slavery, indentureship, and so forth. When we speak about digital colonialism, what we're speaking about is really people utilizing modern technology, modern tools, the internet, and so forth, to control or to gain control of the minds of people. So whereas before, a few hundred years ago, the power or economic wealth and control came from gaining land resources, what we're seeing now is the mind is being seen as the key to wealth and power.
It's something like mind control, hence the title of the book. And if I were to just read an excerpt from it, it was an island nation, self-contained, yet with a variety of cultures, creating an interesting cultural tension to explore. Why do you think TNT was described as an ideal laboratory to run these tests?
You see, my understanding is that the intention was really to attempt to gain control over, I think it's North America, for example, which is a really, really, really big place with many different groups of people, many different ideas, many different cultures, ideologies, and so forth. So from that perspective, Trinidad and Tobago can be seen as a sort of a microcosm of what a larger metropolitan nation would be like. Unlike some of the other islands where the majority of the population may have been from one race or one background, we have this sort of melting pot here, which is really not characteristic of many of the other islands.
It's interesting that you would describe it as a melting pot. What they got, at least from the book, was cultural tension. They were able to pick that up.
Well, a pot is a very hot thing, you know. And melting is not something that is really pleasant if you think about it, right? So yes, it's a melting pot in the sense that we're all inside of the same pot. And we have to find ways to get along. But it's not always easy. And there is some discomfort involved.
Now, they did admit to be doing quite a bit of spying. They said it was plain and simple, it was spying. Do you think it's possible to predict criminal intent using digital means?
Let me tell you something. While we can never perfectly map personality, it is possible to predict people's behavior to a very, very high level of accuracy. In the field, in the practice of psychology, we use assessments, psychological and psychometric assessments all the time, so this is not a new concept, it's not a new idea. So taking that same concept and applying it to mining information, what people view, where they go, how often, what they look at, what they do at night, what they do during the day, and then trying to use that information to predict other things, including deviant behavior. It's not far-fetched at all.
Okay, but predicting is one thing, but some allegations go as far as to influence how someone votes. Prediction versus influencing.
You see, any superpower could be used for good or it could be used for evil. Okay? So in the same way as you can gain an understanding of what's going on in people's minds, and you can use that for insight, you could use that for learning, you could use that to help improve, you can potentially also use that to influence and manipulate.
So are you saying by flooding me with certain articles, flooding me with ads, you can influence my behavior or my perception? Is that what you mean?
Well, it's obviously a lot deeper than that. I must understand what sort of drives you and what you're interested in and what sort of things really tickle you. But in theory, it's quite possible to do so.
Given what we've seen from the book, should people be concerned? Should the average citizen be concerned that someone out there may have this data on them?
Absolutely, absolutely, because You know, psychology has always been about freedom of expression, freedom of thought, and the idea that somebody can take information from me that I did not willingly give, and then use that information to influence my thinking and my behavior, because behavior is influenced by thinking. You think something first, then you act. The idea that people can do that without my consent, without my knowledge, without me even knowing about it, is a very frightening idea.
What would be your advice for people, particularly those who use social media for hours for the day?
Yeah. From the beginning, we've always said be very wary of what you put out on social media. There are a lot of people who live their entire lives out there. It's never something that professionals would suggest. You can put things that you believe are safe, things that would sort of safeguard and protect you from the really, really critical, important things that you don't want the general public to know. And, you know, it can be a fun thing. It could be nice to connect with people. But putting every detail out there, putting your life out there, putting the days when you're having a bad day with your work, for example, and you blow up and you say something, no, you don't do those things. No.
You know, Darrell, I'll tell you something interesting, though. As of recently, I've been noticing sometimes, and I did pass this with a couple of my colleagues, just by mentioning something, talking about it, my device isn't on, I'm not doing a search, I'm talking about something, and a few minutes after, maybe when I go to check my phone, I'm seeing an ad for the exact same thing. Coincidence, you think?
It's not a coincidence. What about you speak to someone, and then later on you're going through Facebook, and you know there's a suggested friends, you see the person that you were speaking to before. I've seen things like that happen all the time. It's not a coincidence by any means.
Does it give it a new twist to the mental slavery that Bob Marley would have sung about? Again,
it can. It all depends on how it's used. But and this is my personal opinion, the temptation to use these means for personal gain is too strong. And there needs to be monitoring of it, and it needs to be restricted, and it needs to be clamped down.
It needs to be monitoring, restricting, and clamping down. Darrell Joseph, thank you so much for joining us on set tonight. Coming up a little on in our newscast, the OWTU unveils the new look of patriotic energies ahead of the refinery takeover.